welcome back. All right, today I'm going to talk about the crash that just happened over at Haneda, Toyko International in Japan. I know there's a lot of information out there on this, but I have to tell you, I don't agree with a lot of what I'm seeing. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to give you my take on it. And then I want to get into how I think this happened. All right, so just a quick summary. We have an Airbus A350 coming into land on 34 right. An A350, it's a 900, I believe. That's a very, very large aircraft, a wide-body twin-engine jet. That aircraft holds up to 440 passengers, depending on the configuration. Coming into land, it collided with a Dash 8. That was a Japan Coast Guard Dash 8. I believe the aircraft was part of the Japan Imperial Navy. So why was this Dash 8 on the runway and how did this collision happen? All right, let's get right into this and see. All right, I'm using a video here that I found from Maximus Aviation. It's an excellent video, so thank you, Maximus Aviation, and I'm going to borrow it. All right, so here we have the Coast Guard aircraft taxiing down taxiway Charlie. They make a left turn, they enter runway 34 right at Charlie 5. They line up right on the center line, they take position, and they sit there awaiting their takeoff clearance. Meanwhile, the Airbus, the A350, is coming in on final. They touch down right in the touchdown zone. I see they have their main gear down, and just as they're starting to complete their landing roll, they go right through that Dash 8. The explosion that you see here is not the Airbus, that is the fuel from the Dash 8. If you look at this more closely, it looks like they have the main landing gear down. The nose gear is still in the air because they have not completed that landing when they hit the Dash 8. Alrighty then, let's take another look at this using a little Google Earth magic. This one is mine. All right, so take a look here. We've got the runway overlay and where I believe the aircraft were at the impact. Now, putting this into motion, you can see the Airbus coming in, tracking the center line beautifully, exactly where he's supposed to be. I believe he touched down right about there, right in the touchdown zone, and then just seconds later, if that, it impacted the Dash 8. Look at the size difference here between the Airbus and that Dash 8. The Airbus was a monster compared to the Dash 8. I think he just took him out. And from what I understand, 2 of the 3 pilots say they never even saw the Dash 8. Okay, so how did they not see each other? How did the Airbus not see the Dash 8? Well, coming into land, that Dash 8 would have just blended right into all the runway and taxiway lights. And I don't think the Dash 8 had all their landing lights on yet, so they weren't that well lit. All right, how did the Dash 8 not see this monster Airbus coming into land? Well, a couple of reasons. Also, the Airbus would have just blended into the background, all the approach lights. There was a crossing runway off the threshold there. All of that would have camouflaged the Airbus. But on top of that, so this Dash 8 is a high-wing turboprop. Now, I used to fly ATRs. That aircraft has very poor visibility unless you're looking directly in front of you. If you look left or right, you really can't see anything because the wing is there and the prop in the, the engine. So I think taking position, they probably really couldn't see off to their right. And then of course, once they were on the runway in position and hold, the Airbus would have been behind them for that last minute and they wouldn't have been able to see it at all. So now the question that I have is, why did the air traffic controller not see this Dash 8 sitting on the runway for 40 seconds? All right, so looking at all these CCTV tapes, it's really hard to see the Dash 8. It blends right in, but we're looking at it at eye level and from quite a distance. The control tower, I believe the Heneda control tower is 380 feet tall. The reason why the control tower is that high and why it's in the position that it's in is so that it has a bird's eye view and can see the runways and it can see the aircraft that they're talking to at all times. In this situation here, on top of everything else, the conditions, and it was night and everything, they were using one runway for departures and for arrivals. That controller really should have been keeping a sharp eye on the aircraft that he was talking to. And somehow nobody in that tower observed this Dash 8 sitting on the center line for that period of time. Okay, so moving on here. There's quite a few things that I've seen out there in the media that are just inaccurate. One of them is I saw quite a few reports that said this aircraft landed on runway C. Okay, runways are all magnetic headings. They're numbered. That's how you know which runway it is. They're not alphabetically labeled, so I'm not sure how that wasn't corrected sooner. A student pilot could have pointed that mistake out. All right, I've also noticed quite a few images that have been released out there have been photoshopped or edited. Here's just one example. Looks like they removed the name of the airline from the side of the aircraft before releasing it. Kind of makes you wonder what else has been edited and photoshopped before being released to the media. All right, and something else that I've seen quite a bit of is that this evacuation was completed in 90 seconds. There's no way this evacuation was completed in 90 seconds. 90 seconds has to do with certification with the FAA, has nothing to do with this incident on this day. Just looking at the video clips and listening to passenger interviews, I mean, the fire trucks had already arrived and were putting out the fire well before the first door was even opened. Let's just look at this video here and see what we see. Okay, so looking at this video, that cabin was filling up with smoke right after touchdown. Flight attendants were on the interphone. I don't know what their procedures are, but apparently they were trying to talk to the purser who was trying to talk to the pilot to inform them of the fire. The pilot's perspective would have been very different. I believe up there in the cockpit, they had no indication of a fire in the cockpit and they couldn't see any fire and they were busy shutting engines down. So I think that everybody was on a little bit of a different page here. The flight attendants in the back were waiting apparently to get permission to open the doors. Now, I know a lot has been said about the Japanese culture and how disciplined these passengers were, which they were. Holy moly, they were really keeping their cool. But I've seen some videos where they translated what you can hear in the background here into English, and as disciplined as they were, they're humans, right? These aren't robots. These people are in the back. They're inside a capsule that is filling up with smoke and they're surrounded by fire. It probably really burned their lungs and it must have been very hot back there. And they were sitting there for, I think it was a good 5 minutes before the first door was even opened. I've seen lots of reports anywhere from 90 seconds to 18 minutes to get everybody out. I think 18 minutes sounds a lot more logical to me. From what I understand, the captain was the very last person out of the aircraft after every passenger and every flight attendant was safely on the ground. Japan Air has a very serious safety culture, very serious. They take their training very seriously. They take personal ownership and responsibility very seriously. I'll just note, back in 1985, I believe a 747, a JAL516 had crashed. The investigation subsequently showed that Japan Airlines was not responsible for this crash. It actually was caused by a faulty maintenance repair by Boeing. Well, in the end, a maintenance manager and I believe an engineer who had signed off this repair both committed suicide as a means of atonement. So I'm just saying that this airline takes safety very seriously. The flight attendants are trained very, very well. I think they work together as a team, and there are some things that did go wrong here. and it should not have taken 18 minutes, but I think that they did a good job. I think that they took this very seriously. I think they successfully got everybody off the aircraft, so kudos to them. I'd just like to note here that this aircraft, the Airbus A350, I think, and the 787 are the only two aircraft in the world that use composite materials now to build the fuselage. This Airbus, this particular one, I think was just 2 years old. It has the latest in safety technology that most other aircraft in the air don't have. So composite materials, as the name implies, it combines different materials. In this case, it's carbon fiber with reinforced plastic to build the fuselage. And what that does is it's a lot lighter than metals, but it also gives you added protection against fire. It insulates the passengers. It takes longer for that fiber to be burnt through. And it gave those passengers that extra time to get off the airplane that they would not have had if it was a different aircraft. Something else to note is that all toxic materials inside aircraft have been removed and replaced with non-toxic materials, so that when an aircraft does catch on fire and it burns and you're breathing in that smoke, you're not overcome and dead from the fumes before you get a chance to get out of the aircraft. So although I'm sure that smoke really stung and was very uncomfortable for the passengers to breathe in, it did not incapacitate them. They were still able to function and to get off the aircraft. I'd just like to say there's an awful lot that goes into the safety of aircraft these days. There are a lot of people that work behind the scenes that make survivability far greater. And boy, I tell you, these engineers that design this stuff, it's like way above my intelligence level, the stuff that they come up with to make these aircraft more survivable. I know people are saying this is a miracle that all these passengers got off. People, it's not a miracle. It's very intentional. It's due to the dedication and the hard work of a lot of people. Everybody from the pilots flying the airplane and all their training, the flight attendants who are trained to get the passengers off the airplane, and all the engineers behind the design of these aircraft to keep them safe when the worst, does happen. All right, so I'm gonna switch the topic just a little bit here. This accident reminds me a lot of one in our history, Tenerife. All right, so Tenerife is an accident that happened in 1977, and there are a lot of similarities. So the Tenerife accident holds the record for the deadliest air disaster in the history of the world. It's very similar to what just happened here in Tokyo. I think one of the biggest differences is that the passengers in Tokyo had a lot more time to evacuate the aircraft than they did back then on the 747 that burned very, very quickly. So in a nutshell, in Tenerife, which is an island in the Canary Islands, there were two Boeing 747s that were on the same runway. A Pan Am aircraft was back taxiing on the runway, and a KLM 747 was departing on that runway. The KLM aircraft called for his takeoff clearance, believed he got a takeoff clearance, and resumed to take off on the runway. And they had a collision right on the center line with the Pan Am 747. So what went wrong here? Boy, there are a lot of parallels. Both of these crews believed that they had gotten a clearance for that runway from air traffic control. Both of them had misunderstood that communication, and that was a huge error. Both of these situations, the aircraft simply couldn't see each other, one because it was night conditions and the other because of the weather, it was foggy. And both of these situations, the air traffic controller that was working the airplanes completely missed it, did not realize or notice that these aircraft were on the runway and that they were going to collide. And both of these pilots had misunderstood the controller because of, I think, expectation bias. And the KLM incident, KLM Pan Am, they had asked for a takeoff clearance. They believed the runway was declared, and they believed they had gotten that clearance. And this incident that just happened a few days ago in Tokyo, I believe that the Coast Guard pilot also believed that he was cleared onto the runway. Okay, so let's look at this. Back when the Pan Am Tenerife accident happened, they realized that the air traffic controller had used the word takeoff in the clearance to the KLM crew, and they were not actually cleared for takeoff. And because of that, they changed the laws. The ICAO rules changed, where a controller could no longer use the word takeoff unless they were actually clearing you for takeoff. That cleared up a lot of confusion, and that accident has never happened again. That situation has never happened again. Those changes made a big difference, right? Game changer. All right, so now looking at Tokyo. All right, why did this pilot, an intelligent military pilot, probably both the pilots, I'm assuming here, believe they had a clearance onto the runway? They weren't idiots. They had a lot of experience. I believe this dash captain, this Coast Guard captain, had 4 years of time in this aircraft. He knew what he was doing. He was familiar with the airport. Well, if you look at the ATC tapes here, all right, actually, let's look at the ATC tapes here. Tower, Juliet Alpha, 772 Alpha, Charlie. Juliet Alpha, 772 Alpha, Tokyo Tower. Good evening. Number 1, taxi to holding point, Charlie 5. Taxi to holding point, Charlie 5, Juliet Alpha, 772 Alpha, number 1. Thank you. Okay, so the Coast Guard pilot hears you're number 1. Delta was assigned number 2. There's an aircraft coming into land. Apparently that Coast Guard pilot interpreted that to mean, get on the runway, we're about to give you a clearance for takeoff, be ready, be prepared, get going. Now, the controller did not tell him to get on the runway, but at the same time, he also didn't tell him to hold short of the runway. Now, keep in mind, we're operating at an airport on a runway where you've got military and you've got civilian and you've got international aircraft. Most of these pilots are speaking English as a second language. You need to have phraseology that is consistent around the world, consistent with everybody, so everybody knows what everybody else is doing and it's crystal clear. So ICAO procedures require a controller to use the words hold short when they don't want them to cross onto the runway. And a pilot is required to read that back, hold short. If the pilot doesn't read it back, then the controller is required to request a read back. None of this happened here. Now, I don't know exactly what the procedures are at Heneda, but they should be consistent with the procedures of all airports around the world if we're going to mix all of this traffic together on the same runway. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. So, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that you can always beef up safety, right? Every single time something happens, that is an opportunity to save lives in the future. I don't want to see a Tenerife 2 or 3 or 4. I want to nip this in the bud right now, all right? We need to change the phraseology to make sure it is consistent. I think we need to make sure that the words hold short are said every single time an airplane comes up to a runway and they're expecting to get on that runway, but it's not their turn quite yet. All right, everybody, we can always do things better, right? We can always beef up safety. I think that this accident here in Haneda is a great opportunity to learn how to do a few things better. And yeah, I think we need to take advantage of that and maybe change a couple things. All right, everybody, have a great day. And until next time, like and subscribe if you want me to do it next time, actually. All right, goodbye.